Okay, go.
Alright, so to continue our discussion of Marcus Garvey, and let me show you a picture of this guy. So you can kind of make your own judgment about this fella. Marcus Garvey, hold that up there for a second. As I said, he sold stock in the Black Star Line. Working class and other followers bought the stock. Now, the big problem here was basically, if you are going to be the first to do something, it's like, and I think it's probably something a lot of women I've talked to can kind of relate to this. If you're the first to do something, you've got to do it like 100% perfect, really 500% perfect, to be taken half as seriously. Well, the problem with the Black Star Line was that it was poorly run, it was poorly managed, and it went bankrupt fairly quickly. Now, the problem with Garvey that runs him into problems with people like W.E.B. Du Bois is that he is way more militant. He is proud of his quote-unquote blackness, which is fine. But he also believed in pageantry at his meetings. You saw he was wearing a uniform. I think the hat makes that uniform. That's like the greatest hat of all time, I think. And what separates him from people like W.E.B. Du Bois is that he wanted separation. He doesn't want integration. He was actually one of the Back to Africa folks. Though, which is a bad term because none of these people had ever been to Africa. So how bad was it for W.E.B. Du Bois? W.E.B. Du Bois decides that Garvey really needs to go, so he helps the FBI with a fraud investigation that sends Garvey to prison for 4 years on tax fraud charges. So that's just all by way of saying that not everybody is necessarily on the same page. Now, one really awesome thing to kind of come out of this era was called the Harlem Renaissance. And this really was a flourishing of black culture. Poetry and jazz is a part of this. And however you may feel about jazz, I'm playing with my phone because I'm going to pull up a poem I want to read for you guys. It is a very uniquely American form of music. The poetry and the jazz and the books all spoke of the African American experience. For instance, one poet, a guy named James Weldon Johnson, wrote a poem called The Prodigal Son. And what that was about, it talked about the dangers faced by Southern immigrants to the North. Because, as you know, as blacks from the South came to the North, there was some racial tension we had talked about before. And he basically lays it all out there. Now, one of the problems that some people had with the poetry and books and jazz and music of this era was that a lot of people kind of saw it as airing the dirty laundry. But others felt like, what, this is how you get better. You gotta put it all out there to bear. As far as jazz goes, it was seen for some as a unique expression, while others saw it as the devil's music. But then again, that's just every generation of music. The old folk always think that the new music is the devil music, though the stuff you guys listen to, I'm pretty sure that Satan has something to do with some of that, because that is just some terrible stuff. So we also have stories about the seedy side of life. A guy named Claude McKay, who I will actually share a poem from him, wrote about crime, pimps, alcohol, and whores. So he's probably a fun guy to hang out with on a Saturday night. So I'm gonna read to you a couple of pieces of art from the era. One poem by the aforementioned Claude McKay, though this is not about whores and prostitutes, but it is very much talks about kind of the black experience by some. I'll read this one first, and then I'll read a poem by Langston Hughes, which is more optimistic. This poem by Claude McKay is called If We Must Die. If we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and pinned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our accursed lot. If we must die, oh let us nobly die, so that our precious blood may not be shed in vain. Then even the monsters we defy shall be constrained to honor us though dead. O kinsmen, we must meet the common foe, and for their thousand blows deal one death blow. What though before us lies the open grave? Like men will face the murderous cowardly pact, pressed to the wall, dying but fighting back. So it's about resistance. Now on the other spectrum, you got Langston Hughes, who you had probably had to read before in various English classes. Perhaps his best known is called I Too Am America. And it goes, I too sing America. I am the darker brother they send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. So that kind of shows you two things. Now, what I really want you to do is I want you to dive into the Harlem Renaissance. So here's an extra credit opportunity for you. Now you can't use either of the two that I just used, but you can find a piece of art, music, or poetry from the Harlem Renaissance and just write me a half a page about what it's about. Just, tell me what you feel about it. Tell me what it's talking about. But there's that extra credit opportunity because I really want you to kind of get into this. Alright, so next up, and this is always the part of a lecture that makes me kind of feel uncomfortable because I feel like I'm about to mansplain some stuff to y'all. Let's talk about women in the 1920s. Now, as you know, women finally got the right to vote after World War I, and we saw how women did a good job making, factory stuff, and we're like, maybe we should let the women folk vote. Well, Congress decided, women, huh? Well, that's a whole new group for us to pander to. So in 1921, they passed what was called the Shepard-Turner Act. And this was money to give to poor mothers to teach them about nutrition, hygiene, and prenatal care. This is actually very important, the prenatal care. It also provided nurses for low-income pregnant women and new moms. And so this really did a whole lot for women and children during this era. It was an extremely popular program. However, when it came to renew it in 1929, it wasn't renewed. And the reason for that is women were not seen as an actual voting bloc of their own. Women in the 1920s tended to vote the way their husbands or their dads told them to. And so Congress was excited. They're like, woohoo, we don't have to pay attention to them. Yay, us. So, kind of keep that in mind next election day. Now, another thing that happens during this era is they were unable to get the Equal Rights Amendment passed, which may happen this year because Virginia's two houses went Democratic and we only need one more state to ratify the ERA. However, there will be a court challenge because there was an arbitrary deadline put on the passage of the ERA. It said it had to be done within 20 years. That, however, was not the case on any other amendment. In fact, one of the original amendments to the Constitution that did not pass originally passed in 1994. So you're telling me, if we can wait 200 years on one, we can wait 60 years on the ERA, I think. Now, the ERA was not particularly... Some women actually opposed it. In fact, young women in their 20s really were not as political as their mothers had been, and that's always kind of the way. You got one generation that works their butt off, and then the next generation is just like, whatever. Looking at you millennials, which I don't really have many in class. You guys are, most of you all are the next generation, which are way better than millennials. Eleanor Roosevelt actually opposed the ERA. What the concern was is that women had been built into law certain things within the jobs to, you know, make it easier for women. They were afraid that they would lose some of that. Young women during this time were actually more concerned with just working. 23.6% of the workforce in 1920 were women. Companies began advertising to women because while the women voted the way their menfolk told them to, women were the ones who were making purchasing decisions in the house. So, hey, Congress didn't care about you, but Palmolive soap sure did. So, that's something, I guess. Now, for the very, very uncomfortable part of the 1920s, let's talk about Margaret Sanger. Margaret Sanger is going to fight for women to have the right to access to birth control. Now, in 1916, she opened the first birth control clinic in Brooklyn. She passed out flyers about contraception. She said that for women, it would be better to use contraception than to have to go get a back alley abortion. The problem here is this was illegal because of something called the Comstock Act, which was passed in 1873, that made it illegal to give out information, even information about birth control. By 1878, only New Mexico did not have a ban on the distribution of information about birth control. Now, Sanger will be thrown in jail for 30 days and she will not be treated particularly well while she's there. Now, one thing that offended, I think, the men who saw her as a threat was that she said that women had the same right to enjoy intercourse too, without having to worry about getting pregnant or other things. So she said women should be allowed to use contraception. And frankly, this is a debate that we can get into it next time if you want to, but this is kind of a debate we still seem to have about whether or not what we should do about access to birth control in this country. By the late 20s, we do begin to see birth control clinics nationwide.